Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Father Brown and the widow pointed at him, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. Father Brown's Deadly Widow's Secret. The clock struck midnight, and the scream that echoed through the empty manor could only be the harbinger of death. It was unmistakable, unnatural, and filled with a terror that sent chills through the very walls. Father Brown stood in the shadows of the grand hallway, his brow furrowed, his heart racing, though his face remained calm, as always. He had heard it, the scream, the unmistakable cry for help that rippled through the house like a crack in the very fabric of reality. But as he moved silently towards the source, something told him this was no ordinary case. This was a case that would burrow deep into his soul and leave its mark forever. The scene before him was one of quiet devastation. The widow, her face a mask of sorrow and grief, stood at the center of the room, her body trembling in the dim candlelight. But it wasn't grief that radiated from her. It was something far darker. There was something in the air, something so suffocating that Father Brown could almost taste it. She hadn't been crying, no. Her eyes were dry, but her hands were stained with something that wasn't water. He approached cautiously, his mind working a mile a minute, piecing together the fragments of his observations. The widow's name was Eleanor Harker, and she was known for her reserved demeanor, a woman so steeped in grief and propriety that no one had ever questioned her motives. But Father Brown knew better than to take people at face value. Everyone had secrets, and those secrets, they always found a way to claw their way to the surface. The body on the floor, draped in a blood-stained sheet, was the first shock to hit him. But it was the second shock that would haunt him. The widow hadn't even moved when he entered. She hadn't screamed again. She hadn't reacted at all. Instead, she stood, motionless, as if frozen in place by something far worse than grief. "Father," she said in a hollow voice, her eyes never meeting his, "you've come too late." Father Brown didn't flinch. He didn't need to. He knew what it meant. He had seen it too many times before. The quiet acceptance of guilt. The way people broke when they thought they were untouchable, when they thought no one could reach them. "What happened here, Mrs. Harker?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with an underlying steel. She raised her head slowly, her eyes finally locking onto his. They were empty, dead. "You're here because you think you can solve this," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "But you can't. You'll never understand." Father Brown's mind raced. The widow's tone wasn't just one of sorrow. It was a warning. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't nervous. No, she was resigned. Resigned to something terrible. "Tell me what happened," he urged, though he knew the answer wouldn't come easily. "The man on the floor," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He wasn't supposed to be here. He was never supposed to see the truth." Father Brown's pulse quickened. There was something in the way she said it, something that twisted the very air around them. The truth? What truth? He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to know. "I don't understand," Father Brown muttered, though he suspected he did. The question wasn't whether or not the man on the floor had died. No, the question was why and how. "He knew," she continued, her voice cold, distant. "He knew what I'd done. He was going to tell everyone, and I couldn't let him." Father Brown's mind snapped into place. The widow wasn't just grieving. She wasn't just mourning a husband. No, she had done something far worse. And now, this man, the one on the floor, had been silenced. And she had done the silencing. But as Father Brown's mind started to turn, a new question arose. Who was the man? And what was it that the widow had done? There were no simple answers, only complicated truths that would not be easily uncovered. Just then, a loud knock interrupted his thoughts. The door swung open, revealing the local constable, a man who had been on edge ever since he had arrived at the scene. His eyes darted between Father Brown and the widow, his mouth opening to speak, but he hesitated. Father Brown could see it in his eyes. The constable didn't want to be here. He didn't want to know the truth. No one ever did. The constable cleared his throat. "Father, we found something strange. The man, the victim. His body isn't the only thing that's been tampered with." Father Brown's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" The constable hesitated again, looking toward the widow, whose gaze remained locked on Father Brown. "There's something in his mouth, a letter. And Father, it's addressed to you." Father Brown felt the air grow colder. The widow's expression darkened, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "You see," she whispered, "the truth was always meant for you." Father Brown could feel the weight of the letter's contents, even before it was brought to him. The room seemed to close in, the shadows stretching toward him like dark fingers. The letter was an answer, but it wasn't the answer Father Brown wanted. He opened it carefully, his fingers trembling, as he unraveled the paper. The words, scrawled hastily in ink, burned into his mind. "Father Brown, I know the truth, but you will never uncover it. No one will, not even you." The words danced in front of his eyes, their meaning just out of reach. A threat? A confession? It didn't matter. What mattered was that someone close, had known exactly what was happening and had wanted to silence it. "I don't understand," Father Brown muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who is this man? Who is the real victim here?" The widow's lips parted, but before she could speak, a loud crash echoed through the house. Something had fallen, something heavy, something important. Father Brown felt his heart race as his eyes darted to the door. The truth was close. He could feel it. But was he ready for it? Was anyone ready for it? The widow's voice broke through the tension, but it was no longer the voice of a woman in mourning. It was the voice of someone who had long since given up on redemption. "It's too late for answers, Father. You're too deep now, and I've already paid the price." The sound of footsteps approached. The constable was moving closer, but Father Brown knew that this was only the beginning. This mystery was only beginning to unravel, and the deeper he dug, the darker it would get. The question was he willing to risk everything to uncover the truth? "I know who did it," Father Brown said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "but the truth will never be told." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving the widow behind, her secrets locked in the shadows of the old manor. But Father Brown knew something the others didn't. Sometimes The truth is far too dangerous to reveal, and so the mystery remained unsolved. For now, Chapter 2. The widow's accusation that shattered everything. The words hit Father Brown like a sledgehammer, reverberating through the silence of the drawing room. You killed him, Father Brown. It was the kind of accusation that leaves no room for argument, no space for defense. The widow, her eyes wild with a madness that seemed to erupt from the very depths of her soul, stood before him, her finger trembling as it pointed directly at him. Father Brown could feel the weight of the accusation settle over him, suffocating him, making his throat tighten in disbelief. This was no ordinary case. This was not just a mystery that could be solved with keen observation and careful deduction. This was something deeper, darker, a storm that threatened to swallow him whole. He had seen many things in his years as a priest and a detective, but never had he been so personally attacked. The widow, Eleanor Harker, the same woman who had mourned her husband's death, with the solemn grace of someone crushed by a tragedy, now stood before him, her grief twisted into something far more sinister. There was no hint of sorrow in her eyes now, only a cold, biting rage. Father Brown's mind whirled, trying to make sense of what had just been said. The words echoed in his head, the accusation repeating like a loop. You killed him, Father Brown. The widow couldn't possibly believe that. Could she? Her husband had been dead for just under 2 days, and the investigation had barely begun. The police had concluded the death was a natural one. But Father Brown had known from the moment he stepped into the manor that something wasn't right. There were too many inconsistencies, too many things that didn't add up. Father Brown studied the widow carefully. Eleanor Harker, the model of a grieving wife, her face pale and drawn, was no longer the woman he had met upon first arrival. This was a woman who had something to hide, something she had been too afraid to admit until now. Why would you say that? Father Brown asked, his voice calm, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty that even he couldn't mask. Because it's true, Eleanor replied, her voice thick with venom. I know what I saw. I saw the way you looked at him when he was alive, and I saw the way you stood over him when he was dead. Don't pretend you didn't know what you were doing. Father Brown's pulse quickened. The room seemed to shrink around him as his thoughts raced. He had been silent during the early investigation, content to watch from the sidelines, letting the police handle the technicalities. But this was a different kind of battle. He wasn't just solving a crime. Now he was fighting for his very reputation. The widow's words were poison, and they had no intention of stopping. You were too close to him, Eleanor continued, her voice rising with each word, as though the revelation of her own madness was giving her more strength. You needed him out of the way. You thought no one would see it. You thought you could get away with it. But I saw it all. I saw how you smirked when you thought I wasn't looking. Father Brown felt his stomach tighten. He had known the man who had died, Richard Harker, a man of power, wealth, and influence. But the truth was, Father Brown hadn't seen the man in nearly a year. He had stayed away from the Harker estate, deliberately. He had never been fond of Richard's pompous nature and aloof attitude. But Eleanor, she had always been different. She had never seemed to fit with her husband's world. Father Brown had often wondered if there was more to their marriage than met the eye. What do you think I did, Mrs. Harker? Father Brown asked, his voice now steady, betraying none of the turmoil swirling in his mind. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her face suddenly hard. I think you killed him, and I think you thought you could make it look like an accident. But I know better. I saw the way you touched his body, the way you arranged it, as if you knew exactly what you were doing. Father Brown stood frozen, his mind reeling. He hadn't touched Richard Harker's body, not in that way anyway. He had inspected it, yes, but he hadn't made any changes. Had he? Could Eleanor be lying? Could she be making all of this up? The pieces didn't fit, but then again, nothing had fit about this case from the start. "Where is your proof?" Father Brown demanded, stepping forward, his voice sharp. "Where is your evidence that I did this?" Eleanor's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You'll find out soon enough," she said, her voice a whisper filled with a strange, knowing calm. Father Brown's eyes flicked toward the door. He had a sinking feeling in his gut. Something wasn't right. Eleanor was playing a game, and he had no idea of the rules. The tension in the room became unbearable, and Father Brown's instincts kicked in. He needed answers. Fast. The constable, a young man who had been too nervous to speak earlier, stepped into the room, holding something in his hand. It was a letter, the same letter that had been found in the victim's study, just beneath a stack of papers. Father Brown took the letter carefully from the constable's trembling hands. He had already read the letter earlier, but now, with Eleanor's accusations echoing in his ears, the letter seemed to carry a different weight. As Father Brown unfolded the paper, the words on the page blurred before his eyes. It was a message from Richard Harker, a cryptic one. The letter was addressed to no one in particular, but had a clear message. "She will be the end of us all. You must act before she knows." Father Brown's heart skipped a beat. The widow's voice suddenly sounded distant, as if her presence had receded into the background of the growing storm. The letter wasn't just a clue. It was a confession. But what was Richard confessing to? And more importantly, who was she? Was he talking about Eleanor or someone else? Father Brown's thoughts began to spiral as the pieces started to fall into place. Eleanor's obsession with the letter, her dark accusations, and Richard's ominous warning, it was all part of something much bigger. Before Father Brown could process the implications, the room seemed to shift. The air grew thicker, as if the very walls were closing in on him. The quiet whisper of Eleanor's voice reached him once again. "You don't understand, do you? You never will. The truth is buried in more than just the letter. It's buried in us." Father Brown's mind reeled. What did she mean by that? As he turned towards the widow, ready to confront her again, the door slammed shut behind him. His heart raced. The game had changed. The question was no longer just about the death of Richard Harker. It was about everything that had come before. Father Brown turned to leave, the weight of the mystery pressing on his shoulders. But before he could take another step, Eleanor's voice pierced the silence one last time. "You think you know the truth, Father Brown, but you're wrong. You're all wrong." With that, Father Brown stepped into the darkened hallway, the shadows swirling around him. The case had only just begun, but already he felt like he was losing his grip on reality. How could he trust anything now? The widow's accusations, Richard's cryptic letter, and the chilling sense of foreboding that hung in the air. It was all too much. But Father Brown knew one thing for certain. This was a case that would consume him, body and soul, until the very end. The truth was out there, but whether it could ever be uncovered was another question entirely. As Father Brown walked into the night, he muttered to himself, "I know who did it, but the truth will never be told." Chapter 3. the widow's shocking pointed finger. The room fell dead silent as Eleanor Harker's trembling hand lifted and her finger slowly, deliberately pointed straight at Father Brown. "You," she said, her voice cold and steady. "You killed him." Father Brown felt the blood drain from his face. He stood there, motionless, for a moment, processing the weight of the accusation that now hung in the air. The words had shattered the fragile calm of the investigation. Eleanor's eyes were wild, filled with something far darker than grief. The accusation wasn't just a statement. It was an indictment, a judgment, a death sentence that she was delivering without any remorse. Father Brown had seen many things in his years as a priest and an investigator, but never anything quite like this. Eleanor Harker had been the epitome of sorrow, a woman drowning in the pain of losing her husband. Or so he had believed. But now, with a single, horrifying gesture, she had thrown everything into chaos. He wasn't prepared for this. No one was. But what was more unsettling than the finger she pointed at him was the certainty in her eyes. She was not crying. She was not pleading for mercy. She was accusing him as if she had known all along that this moment would come. The words burned into him like acid, and for a moment, Father Brown's mind went blank. Could this really be happening? Could she really believe that he, Father Brown, had murdered Richard Harker? Eleanor's voice broke through the silence again, quieter this time, but even more forceful. "I watched you, Father. I watched you stand over him. I watched you when you thought no one was looking. You did it. You killed him." Father Brown swallowed hard, his throat tight with the pressure of the moment. This was not just an accusation. It was a challenge. Eleanor Harker was trying to manipulate the investigation, and if he wasn't careful, she could lead him down a path that could end in disaster. The cold chill in her eyes wasn't just sorrow. It was something far worse. It was malice. "I don't understand, Mrs. Harker," Father Brown said, his voice measured, but with an edge that belied his calm demeanor. "What are you saying?" Eleanor's lips curled into a smile that was far too sharp for someone who had just lost her husband. "You killed him because you thought you could get away with it. But you didn't count on me seeing the truth. You didn't count on me knowing what you were trying to hide." Father Brown's mind was racing now. He needed to remain calm, to keep the situation from spiraling further out of control. But Eleanor wasn't making it easy. She was playing a game, one that was far more dangerous than anything he had encountered before. "I'm not the one who killed Richard," Father Brown said, his voice low and steady. "I'm here to uncover the truth, not to bury it. If you know something, Mrs. Harker, then you must tell me." Her laugh was cold, hollow. "You think you can solve this? You think you can uncover the truth? You have no idea what you're dealing with, Father. You've walked right into something you'll never understand." Father Brown felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had seen enough in his time as a priest to know that when people were this determined to hide something, it meant they were guarding a secret, one so dark, so twisted, that even the idea of revealing it would shatter everything. He took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied her closely. "You seem to know a lot about what happened, Mrs. Harker. What is it that you're hiding?" Her eyes flicked to the side, as though considering whether to speak or not. Then, as though making up her mind, she turned back to face him, her expression hardening. "You really want to know the truth, Father?" she asked, her voice icy. "You think the truth will set you free? You're wrong. The truth will only destroy you. Richard wasn't the only one who knew what happened. I know too." Father Brown's pulse quickened. This was it, the first real break in the case. If Eleanor was telling the truth, then everything he had assumed about the situation so far was wrong. But he couldn't let his guard down. He had to be careful. "What do you mean?" he asked. His tone measured, though he could feel the urgency rising within him. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes piercing through him like a blade. "Richard wasn't a saint. He had enemies, Father. People who would stop at nothing to destroy him. But you don't know that, do you? No, because you've been too busy trying to pin this on me." Father Brown's mind raced. Richard had been wealthy, influential, and arrogant, traits that often earned one a number of enemies. But how far did those enemies go? Was someone trying to frame Eleanor, or was she simply playing the victim? And where did he fit into all of this? He needed more. He needed proof, something concrete that could either confirm or disprove Eleanor's accusations. But she wasn't making it easy. Every word she spoke only raised more questions, more confusion. Suddenly the door opened behind him, and a figure stepped into the room. It was the constable, his face pale and drawn, holding something in his hand. Father Brown turned, his heart skipping a beat. The constable was holding a letter, the same letter that had been found in Richard Harker's desk. The letter that had been so cryptic, so enigmatic, it had only deepened the mystery. Father Brown took the letter from the constable's trembling hands, his mind already calculating what this might mean. If Eleanor's accusations were true, then this letter could hold the key to everything. He unfolded it slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. The ink was smudged in places, but the words were clear enough. The one who is truly guilty will not be the one who stands accused. The truth lies in the shadows, and it is only through the light of understanding that it will be revealed. Father Brown's stomach dropped. The message was clear. Richard had known something. He had uncovered a truth that would bring everything crashing down, but he hadn't been able to act on it before his death. But what was the truth? What had Richard discovered? And why had he left such a cryptic message? As Father Brown stood there, holding the letter, Eleanor's voice rang out again, this time filled with a cold, quiet fury. "You're wasting your time, Father. You think you can find the answers, but you're too late. The truth will remain hidden, just as it always has." Father Brown's hands clenched into fists as he processed her words. Could she be right? Was he too late? Had he already been pulled too deep into a web of lies and deceit that he would never escape? The questions piled up, each one more insistent than the last, but none of them brought him closer to the truth. He could feel himself slipping further into the darkness, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let go. Not now. He turned to the constable, his voice low and filled with determination. "We need to find out who else had access to Richard's letter. Who else knew what he knew? Someone has the answers, and I intend to find them." But as Father Brown moved to leave, Eleanor's voice stopped him once again. "You think you'll find the truth, Father? You think the letter will lead you to the answers? I know who did it, but you'll never hear it from me. The truth is mine to keep." Father Brown's heart sank. He had no idea who he could trust anymore. Every step he took seemed to lead him deeper into a maze of lies, and with every turn, the truth grew more elusive. As he stepped into the night, the weight of the mystery pressing down on him, Father Brown couldn't help but wonder, was the truth already lost, or was there still a way out? And with that, the door closed behind him, the shadows swallowing him whole. The case was far from over, but the deeper he delved, the more he realized some truths were better left buried. Chapter 4. Father Brown's Unforgivable Mistake Revealed. The sound of the clock ticking was the only thing Father Brown could hear, and with each passing second, the weight of his own failure pressed down on him. His breath caught in his throat as he turned the letter over in his hands, a cold, sick realization spreading through him. The ink, still fresh on the page, was a confession that was not meant for his eyes, and yet here he was, holding it. "I should never have come here," he whispered to himself, but the words were too late. There was no going back now. Father Brown had spent weeks, maybe even months, investigating the death of Richard Harker. He had followed every lead, studied every clue, and sought out every possible answer. And yet, it was this single piece of paper, this letter, that revealed the truth so devastating, so unforgivable, that it shattered everything he had ever believed in. It was Eleanor Harker who had handed him the letter, a small, thin piece of paper with words that he had not wanted to read. She had been so calm when she gave it to him, as if she knew what would happen when he read it. He had thought it was another dead end, another attempt to manipulate him into doubting his own instincts. But now, holding the letter in his hands, he understood. Eleanor had known from the very beginning. She had known the truth that Father Brown had ignored, dismissed, and even avoided. But why? Why had she waited until now to reveal it? Was she playing him? Or was she trying to protect someone else? Father Brown closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady himself. He needed to think, to focus. But the words in the letter kept playing in his mind like a broken record that refused to stop. "It was you, Father Brown. You were the one who caused it, and you will be the one to pay." He read the words again. Each time they hit him harder, more forcefully. He had never considered himself a man capable of such evil, but there it was, right in front of him, the evidence. But what did it mean? Was this a trap? Was Eleanor really accusing him of something so monstrous? The room seemed to close in on him, and Father Brown felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. He had made a mistake, a fatal mistake. But what was it? What had he missed? And how could he have been so blind? He had always prided himself on his ability to see through the surface, to uncover the truth that lay hidden beneath. But now he realized how wrong he had been. He had overlooked something crucial, something that had been staring him in the face the entire time. He had allowed himself to be distracted, led astray by his own preconceived notions. He had allowed his judgment to be clouded. It was all there in the letter. Eleanor's accusations were not just words. They were the truth. He had been too close to the case, too emotionally invested to see the obvious, and now he was paying the price. The room felt colder now, and Father Brown's hands began to shake. He dropped the letter onto the table, unable to hold it any longer. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all, but every thought, every conclusion, seemed to lead him down a darker path. Could he have really been responsible for Richard Harker's death? Could it have been him all along, the one he had been trying to protect? Father Brown took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had to think clearly. He couldn't afford to let his emotions cloud his judgment any longer. He had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. But before he could gather his thoughts, the door to the room opened, and the constable stepped inside. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. Father Brown could see the tremor in his hands as he approached, his footsteps hesitant, as if he was unsure of what he was about to say. "Father," the constable said, his voice trembling, "there's something you need to see." Father Brown's heart skipped a beat. What could be worse than what he had already uncovered? He didn't think he could handle any more surprises, but the constable's expression made it clear that something was terribly wrong. "Come with me," the constable urged. It's about the letter. We found something in Richard Harker's study." Father Brown followed the constable down the narrow hallway, his mind still reeling. From the letter's revelation, he didn't know what to expect, but he knew whatever it was going to change everything. They arrived at Richard Harker's study, the door slightly ajar. Father Brown stepped inside, and immediately he saw what the constable was referring to. There, on the floor, was another letter. This one, much larger, and covered in red ink. The constable pointed to it, his voice barely above a whisper. "Father, this wasn't in the study when we first looked. It must have been placed here after the investigation began. But look at the writing. It's a warning." Father Brown bent down, his pulse quickening. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Richard's, but the words were chilling. "They're coming for you, Father Brown. You don't know who to trust. You've made an unforgivable mistake. The truth is closer than you think, but it will destroy you." Father Brown's hands shook as he picked up the letter. What was Richard trying to tell him? Was this a final plea, or was it another piece of the puzzle, a warning that had been buried beneath layers of deception? He turned to the constable, his voice low and strained. "What does this mean? What is Richard trying to tell us?" The constable looked at him, his face pale and strained. "Father, I don't know, but it sounds like he knew something important, and now we're too late." Father Brown's mind raced, but before he could process the gravity of the situation, the door slammed open once again. Eleanor Harker stood in the doorway, her face a mask of icy resolve. "Are you ready to face the truth, Father?" she asked, her voice cold and steady. "Or are you going to keep pretending that you don't know what's really going on?" Father Brown felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had no answers, no explanations, only more questions. And Eleanor, she wasn't finished. She wasn't finished with him yet. "I know who did it," she said, her eyes narrowing. "And you will too. But the question is, will you survive the truth?" Father Brown stood frozen, the weight of her words crashing over him. The truth was more elusive than ever, slipping further from his grasp the harder he tried to reach for it. The truth. Was it too much for him to handle? Was he the one who had caused this chaos, this tragedy, or had he been a pawn all along? As Father Brown stepped back, his mind reeling with the revelations, he felt as though the ground beneath him was crumbling. There was no easy answer, no simple solution. Everything he thought he knew was now in question. And as he looked into Eleanor's cold eyes, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. "I know who did it," Father Brown whispered, his voice barely audible. "But the truth will never be told." And with that, the door closed, leaving Father Brown standing in the darkness, the shadows of the mystery closing in around him. The case had only just begun, but already Father Brown could feel the weight of the unbearable truth pressing down on him, threatening to consume him whole. Chapter 5. The lie that almost killed Father Brown. The poison was already in his system when Father Brown finally understood the lie, but by then it was almost too late. His body had betrayed him long before his mind could catch up. The sudden wave of dizziness that hit him as he sat in the study wasn't just exhaustion. It was something far more sinister, creeping through his veins with every breath he took. He'd been poisoned. And by whom? Father Brown couldn't quite grasp the reality of it. His hands shook as he clutched the letter on the desk before him, the words in front of him blurring. It had been Eleanor Harker who had led him here, to this very room. He had trusted her. He had trusted everything she had said, the words she whispered in his ear, the calculated calm in her voice. She had told him of the danger. She had warned him. But Father Brown didn't know how deep the lies ran. He never could have anticipated this. The lies, the deceit, and the cold truth that had been staring him in the face the entire time. "Father, you're not well," the constable had said, his voice sharp with concern. Father Brown had dismissed him, thinking it was just the strain of his investigation. But now, as the dizziness intensified and the room spun around him like a vortex, he knew this wasn't just fatigue. This was far more deliberate. How had they gotten to him? How had he let it happen? Father Brown's eyes darted to the door, his thoughts a tangle of confusion. The poison was coursing through his bloodstream, and yet, as his pulse raced, all he could think about was one thing: the lies. Eleanor Harker had accused him of something far worse than he could have imagined. She had pointed her finger at him, thrown her accusations like daggers. At first, he had thought she was merely trying to protect herself. But what if the truth was more complicated than he could comprehend? What if Eleanor wasn't the only one playing games? What if he had been the pawn all along? Father Brown's mind struggled to keep up, the poison dulling his thoughts, clouding his vision. He could feel his strength ebbing away with each passing second. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the truth was so close, so dangerously within reach. The study was suffocating now. He felt trapped, like an animal cornered by its own fears. He had to think. He had to focus. The letter he had been holding had been the key. The message within it had been cryptic, yet somehow Father Brown had known it was important. But now, as his thoughts muddled together, he couldn't make sense of it. His mind felt like it was breaking apart, like a puzzle with too many pieces scattered across the floor. The words in the letter echoed in his mind, each syllable a reminder of his failure. "You will be the one to pay. It is only a matter of time. And when you do, you will never see it coming." Was this the message that had led him to this? Had someone been watching him, waiting for the moment when he would make the fatal mistake? His body swayed as he tried to stand, the room spinning around him. His vision blurred, but he forced himself to focus, to keep moving. If there was one thing Father Brown knew about himself, it was that he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when there were still so many questions left unanswered. He stumbled to the window, gripping the edge of the desk to steady himself. The cool, night air hit his face, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside him. How had he been so blind? The lies were everywhere, woven into every conversation, every glance, every action that had seemed so innocent at the time. How had he missed the signs? How had he allowed himself to be manipulated like this? The constable had warned him earlier that there was more at play here than just a simple murder investigation. But Father Brown hadn't listened. He had thought he could handle it. He had thought he could see through the lies. But now, as the poison worked its way through him, Father Brown realized the awful truth. He had been the one deceived. He had been played. The door to the study creaked open, and Father Brown's head snapped around, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing in the doorway was Eleanor Harker, her face as unreadable as ever. But her eyes were filled with something else, something darker. "You look pale, Father," she said, softly, stepping into the room, her voice laced with a false sweetness that made Father Brown's stomach churn. "It seems you've finally realized the truth." Father Brown couldn't answer. He couldn't speak, couldn't form the words he so desperately wanted to say. His body betrayed him, his vision narrowing, and everything around him seemed to dissolve into a haze. The poison was taking its toll. Eleanor smiled, her lips curling in a way that made Father Brown's blood run cold. "You should have listened, Father. You should have seen the lies before it was too late. But you were too caught up in your need to save everyone, to save me. And now you're paying the price." Father Brown's thoughts felt fragmented, like broken glass scattered on the floor. He couldn't make sense of it. He couldn't understand how he had been so easily deceived. Eleanor's words only fueled his confusion, like a twisted mockery of the truth. But it wasn't just her. It was everyone, the constable, the others in the house. They were all playing a part in this game, and Father Brown had been too blind to see it. He staggered back, his legs weak beneath him. He couldn't breathe. His chest tightened as the poison did its work. But even through the fog of sickness, one thing stood out clearly to him. The lie that had almost killed him. The lie that had been woven into the very fabric of his investigation. Eleanor's smile faded slightly as she watched him struggle. "It's too late for you, Father," she whispered. "The truth was always in your reach, but you never saw it. You never understood. But now you will." Father Brown's heart thundered in his chest as the realization hit him. He had been so focused on solving the mystery, on finding the culprit, that he had missed the most important question of all. Who could he trust? His head spun, the weight of his failure settling over him like a heavy shroud. He had been wrong. He had been deceived. But the most shocking part of all, he still didn't know who had betrayed him or why. The room grew darker, and the edges of Father Brown's vision blurred. He collapsed onto the floor, his body heavy with the poison, but his mind still reeling from the truth that had come too late. Eleanor stepped closer, her face inches from his. "You were never meant to uncover the truth, Father. Some things are better left hidden, and now you'll never see it. You'll never know the whole story. But the lie will stay with you forever." With those words, Father Brown's world went black, and as the darkness consumed him, the only thought that lingered was the question that would haunt him forever. Who had lied to him, and why? When he awoke, the room was silent, but the lie was still there, lingering in the shadows. Father Brown had narrowly escaped death, but had the truth truly escaped him? The answer, it seemed, would never come. Not now. Not in this life. "I know who did it," Father Brown muttered under his breath as the shadows closed in around him. But the truth will never be told. And with that, the world went dark again, leaving only the silence and the haunting knowledge that some mysteries were far too dangerous to uncover. Chapter 6. Father Brown's darkest hour unfolds. Father Brown's hands trembled as he stared down at the blood-soaked letter, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was the manifestation of a nightmare, the twisted end of a case he had once thought solvable. But now it was as if the very fabric of reality had unraveled before him. The words were simple, yet their impact hit him like a freight train. You are the reason he died, and you will be. Next, a cold shiver ran through him, the hair on the back of his neck standing up. This was no longer just about murder. This was about something darker, something far more personal. This wasn't just a case. This was his life, his soul, hanging by the thinnest of threads. Father Brown had spent the last several weeks combing through the lies, the deceit, and the tangled web of relationships that surrounded Richard Harker's death. He had believed himself to be on the right path, a man of logic and reason, someone who could uncover the truth no matter how well it was hidden. But now, as he stared at the letter in front of him, he knew he had missed something vital, something that had been staring him in the face the entire time. His mind raced. Who could have left this letter? Who could have known that the walls he had built around himself were so fragile? The truth, it seemed, was far more elusive than he had imagined. Every time he thought he was close, the ground shifted beneath him. And now, this, a letter that threatened his life, a promise that he would be next. He stood frozen in the dimly lit study, the silence deafening, broken only by the faint tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the corner. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. It wasn't just fear he felt. It was the crushing weight of his own failure. Had he allowed himself to become part of this twisted game? Had he miscalculated so terribly that now he was the target? His breath came in shallow gasps as he slowly placed the letter down, his mind spinning. Every possible suspect he had encountered seemed to fade into the background, leaving only one question burning in his mind. What have I missed? The investigation had been full of false leads, dead ends, and the kind of subtle manipulation that only someone with a truly dark mind could orchestrate. Eleanor Harker, the grieving widow, had seemed to be at the heart of it all. But was she the mastermind, or had she been played too? And if so, by whom? Father Brown's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of a door creaking open behind him. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the cross hanging from his neck. But when he saw who had entered the room, his heart sank. It was the constable, but not the constable he knew. The man who had entered the study was a stranger. His uniform was the same, his face vaguely familiar. But there was something about his presence that felt wrong. There was no warmth in his eyes, no empathy, just cold calculation. Father Brown's mind screamed for him to react, to demand answers. But before he could speak, the constable's voice cut through the silence, smooth and controlled. "Father Brown," he said, a mocking smile curling on his lips. "I see you found the letter." Father Brown's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, his mind racing with questions, with dread. The constable's presence felt like a threat, an omen of something much worse to come. The man stepped further into the room, his boots clicking sharply on the wooden floor, his eyes never leaving Father Brown. "You're asking the wrong question, Father. The real question is, why did you believe the lies for so long?" Father Brown took a step back, confusion and fear clouding his judgment. The lies? What was this man talking about? "You think you've been solving a murder," the constable continued, his tone dripping with disdain. "But you've only been chasing ghosts. Richard Harker's death was never about him. It was about you." The words hit Father Brown like a slap to the face. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. He could only stare at the man, his heart pounding, his mind racing. What was happening? Who was this man? And why did he seem to know everything? "You've been following a trail, Father," the man said, stepping closer, his smile widening. "A trail that leads straight to you. You've been digging in all the wrong places. The truth is right in front of you, but you refuse to see it. That's what makes this so delicious." Father Brown's breath caught in his throat. Delicious. This wasn't a game. This wasn't some twisted puzzle for amusement. This was his life on the line, and the man before him seemed to be enjoying every second of it. "What do you want from me?" Father Brown demanded, his voice now laced with desperation. "What have I done? Why are you doing this?" The constable's smile faded, replaced with an unsettling calm. "You've been far too curious, Father. Too clever for your own good. You started asking questions that were never meant to be answered. And now, you're about to find out the price of your mistake." Before Father Brown could respond, the man lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar and pushing him backward. Father Brown stumbled, his feet slipping on the floor, as the weight of the situation became overwhelming. His heart raced, and his breath grew shallow as panic set in. This man was no ordinary constable. This was someone far more dangerous, someone who had been playing a game with him from the start. "You'll never be able to solve this, Father," the man hissed. "The truth will remain buried, and by the time you realize what you've truly uncovered, it will be too late. You will never escape it." Father Brown's mind spun as the man's words crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had always prided himself on his ability to see through deception, to uncover the truth, no matter how dark or complicated it seemed. But this was something entirely different. This wasn't just a mystery to be solved. This was a fight for his life. The constable released his grip, and Father Brown staggered back, struggling to regain his balance. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle that had been shattered in an instant. But before he could make sense of anything, the man turned on his heel and headed for the door, his voice echoing in the study as he spoke one final chilling word. "The lie that almost killed you has already begun." Father Brown stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what to think anymore. Was the constable telling the truth? Had he really uncovered something far worse than he could have ever imagined? As the door slammed shut behind the man, Father Brown's thoughts spiraled into chaos. He was no longer sure who to trust. He had thought he was getting closer to the truth. But now, everything seemed more dangerous, more complex than ever. And as he stood there in the darkness, one question gnawed at him, consuming him from the inside out. Who had been playing him all along? The mystery was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. But would Father Brown survive long enough to see it through? The answer, for now, was uncertain. The shadows grew deeper as the clock ticked on. And as Father Brown took a shaky step forward, he knew that the truth, whatever it was, would cost him more than he had ever bargained for. Chapter 7. The Widow Who Knows Too Much. Father Brown's breath caught in his throat as Eleanor Harker's voice pierced through the silence, each word like a dagger twisted deeper into his chest. "You don't know the whole truth, Father," she said, her voice trembling, but with an icy edge that made his skin crawl. "And if you ever do, it will be the last thing you ever learn." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Father Brown's mind raced. He had been following the trail of lies, deception, and murder for weeks now. Every lead had brought him closer to something, but never enough to see the full picture. And now, Eleanor, her face pale, her eyes dark with secrets, had just thrown a bombshell that threatened to obliterate everything he thought he knew. She had always seemed like a grieving widow, broken by the loss of her husband, Richard Harker. But now, with the chilling revelation in her words, Father Brown realized that she was hiding something far more dangerous, something that, if uncovered, could destroy more than just the investigation. It could destroy him. Eleanor stepped closer, the air between them thick with unspoken truths. "You think you know what happened," she whispered, her eyes locking onto his with a gaze that felt like it was peeling away his very soul. "But you don't. You've been following the wrong path. The real murderer is someone much closer to you than you think." Father Brown's heart raced as he tried to steady himself. He had spent countless hours in the dark corners of this investigation, and now Eleanor's words made everything seem suddenly fragile, as if it would all crumble with a single misstep. He had suspected so many people, the constable, the staff, even the guests at the manor. But he had never considered that someone like Eleanor could be the key to unraveling it all. She was the widow. She was the one who had appeared so broken, so lost. She had seemed like the perfect victim of grief, but Father Brown knew better than anyone. Grief could mask the most sinister of motivations. Had he been blind to it all? Had he underestimated her? "What are you saying, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice trembling more than he'd like to admit. He wasn't sure whether he was asking for an explanation or for a chance to run away from the truth that was slowly beginning to take shape. "I'm saying," she said softly, her eyes narrowing, "that the truth you've been looking for is buried deeper than you realize. Richard's death wasn't just some random act of violence. It was carefully planned, and you've been played all along." Father Brown stood there, his heart pounding. He had always prided himself on seeing through deception. He had always been able to trust his instincts, but now he felt like he was walking through a fog, each step more uncertain than the last. Eleanor continued, her voice growing more insistent. "I know who killed Richard. I know who has been behind everything, and I know why. But the question is, Father Brown, do you really want to know the truth? Because once you do, there's no going back." The room seemed to close in on him as Father Brown tried to digest her words. He had been piecing together the puzzle for weeks, but now, with Eleanor's chilling confession, he realized that everything he had believed was suddenly in jeopardy. His mind raced, and for a moment he felt the overwhelming weight of the investigation crashing down on him. "I have to know, Eleanor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to know who did it. I need to know everything." She looked at him, her face unreadable. "You think you want the truth, Father," she said, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "But the truth is a dangerous thing. It can break you. It can tear apart everything you've ever believed. Once you uncover it, you'll never be the same." Father Brown felt the air grow heavy with her words. The truth. What truth was she talking about? Was this another manipulation, another twisted game designed to confuse him even further? Or was there something truly sinister buried beneath it all? For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air between them. Father Brown couldn't move. He couldn't think. All he could do was stare at Eleanor, waiting for her to reveal more. But she didn't. Instead, she simply smiled, small and cold, like a predator, savoring its prey. Then, without another word, Eleanor turned and walked away, leaving Father Brown standing in the middle of the room, his mind reeling with confusion and dread. He had no idea what to believe anymore. He didn't know whether to trust her or if she was simply trying to manipulate him into a trap. He knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just about solving a murder. This was about something far deeper. The stakes had just been raised, and Father Brown wasn't sure if he was prepared to handle what was coming next. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the coldness of the room seeping into his bones. His hands shook as he reached for the letter that had started it all, the cryptic words that had made him doubt everything. And as his eyes scanned the familiar ink, something caught his attention, a detail he had missed earlier, something that sent a chill through his spine. The handwriting. It wasn't Richard's. Father Brown's breath caught in his throat. The letter had been addressed to him, but the handwriting on the back, it was unmistakably Eleanor's. But why? What was she trying to tell him? The walls of the manor felt like they were closing in on him. Father Brown knew he couldn't trust anyone, not even Eleanor. The truth was slipping further away from him, and the more he tried to grab hold of it, the more it seemed to elude him. He felt like a puppet in someone else's game, the strings being pulled from the shadows. The more Father Brown thought about it, the more everything seemed to fall apart. He had trusted the wrong people. He had made a mistake, a fatal one. He had allowed himself to believe in lies, and now it was too late. The air in the room seemed to grow thicker, darker, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. Father Brown's mind raced. How much did Eleanor really know? How deep did her involvement go? And if she was involved, then who else was part of this twisted web of deception? The answer seemed just out of reach, like a shadow in the corner of his mind. And the more he thought about it, the more the question gnawed at him. Could Eleanor really be the killer, or was she hiding something even darker than that? Father Brown's pulse quickened as the uncertainty of it all weighed on him. His own thoughts were betraying him now. He didn't know who to trust or what to believe, but one thing was certain. The truth had slipped through his fingers, and now it was only a matter of time before it came crashing down, dragging him under with it. As Father Brown stepped out of the room, the door slammed shut behind him with an ominous thud. He looked around the dimly lit hallway, every shadow seeming to watch him, every creak of the floorboards whispering secrets that he wasn't ready to hear. There was no turning back now. He had stepped too far into the darkness. He had to know who did it. But was the truth worth the cost? And as Father Brown's footsteps echoed in the silence, one question lingered in his mind, unanswered, relentless. What if the widow knew too much, but was hiding everything? The answer, it seemed, would remain a mystery for now. Chapter 8. A Secret That Haunts Father Brown. The confession came in the dead of night, delivered by someone whose face Father Brown would never forget, even if he wanted to. It was the woman he had trusted most, Eleanor Harker, and what she revealed shattered him in a way that no crime scene, no dark alley, no murder investigation ever had. "It's me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've been hiding it all along, but now it's your turn to live with the truth." Father Brown stood frozen, his mind swirling in confusion and disbelief. He had thought he understood the complexities of the case, the layers of deceit that had ensnared him. But this was something entirely different. Eleanor's words weren't just an admission. They were a death sentence. For weeks, Father Brown had been investigating the murder of Richard Harker, the enigmatic and wealthy man whose death had set in motion a chain of events that threatened to destroy everything he had pursued, the truth following every lead, every breadcrumb of evidence. But this confession shattered the foundation of everything he believed about the case, and with it, the darkness began to close in. Eleanor had always seemed like the victim, the widow in mourning, the woman struggling to cope with the loss of her husband. But what if she had been the one pulling the strings all along? What if the grief she had displayed was nothing but a carefully constructed mask? The idea made Father Brown's head spin. Was she the killer, or was she simply complicit in something much larger than she realized? "I don't understand," Father Brown said, his voice hoarse. "What do you mean, Eleanor? What truth?" Eleanor looked at him, her eyes hollow and exhausted. "The truth about Richard, and about what happened that night. I didn't want you to know, Father. I didn't want anyone to know, but I can't keep it inside any longer. It's too much. I thought I could bury it, but it's not just Richard's death that haunts me. It's everything that came before." Father Brown felt the air around him grow colder as Eleanor spoke, her words like heavy stones sinking into the pit of his stomach. What had she been hiding? What was so terrible that it could break a woman so thoroughly? And what did it have to do with him? Eleanor took a shaky breath, her voice barely audible. "You asked the wrong questions, Father. You were looking at the wrong people. Richard's murder was only the beginning. The real truth, the one that no one ever wanted to face, is that we all have blood on our hands." Father Brown took a step back, the weight of her words crashing into him like a wave. Blood on our hands? Could Eleanor be implying that they were all guilty in some way? Was this more than just a murder mystery? Was there a far deeper conspiracy that even he had failed to see? "I need to know what you mean, Eleanor," Father Brown demanded, though a small part of him was already dreading the answer. "Tell me everything." She hesitated as if trying to find the right words to explain the incomprehensible. "It was never supposed to happen, Father. But when Richard started asking questions, things got out of control. He wasn't supposed to uncover the things he did. He wasn't supposed to see what he saw." Father Brown's heart raced. What did he see, Eleanor? What was he investigating? She swallowed hard, her face pale and drawn. He started looking into things that no one wanted him to. He found out about the money, the people we owed, and the things we did to keep ourselves safe. I thought I could stop him, but it was too late. He was already too deep, and when he threatened to expose it all, I had to do something. Father Brown felt his blood run cold as the pieces began to fall into place. Eleanor wasn't just a widow mourning her husband. She had been part of a much darker world, a world of secrets, debts, and lies, a world where murder wasn't the worst thing that could happen. No, it was what lay beneath the surface, what was hidden in the shadows, that was truly terrifying. You killed him, Father Brown whispered, more to himself than to her. Eleanor's eyes flickered with something between guilt and relief. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it wasn't just me, Father. It was all of us. We were all complicit. And now, it's too late. The secret we've been hiding for so long is coming to the surface, and there's nothing any of us can do to stop it. Father Brown's mind spun. What was she saying? How could it be that everyone he had encountered in this twisted investigation was involved? Was Eleanor really confessing to being the mastermind behind Richard's murder? And if so, why had she waited until now to reveal the truth? The room seemed to close in on Father Brown as the weight of her words settled over him. He had spent so much time trying to solve the murder of Richard Harker, but now he was confronted with something far more complex, far more dangerous. Eleanor's confession was only the tip of the iceberg. If what she was saying was true, then everything he thought he knew about this case was wrong. The truth was slipping through his fingers, and every time he thought he was getting closer to it, the ground shifted beneath him. The questions kept multiplying, and the answers kept evading him. He was drowning in a sea of confusion, suspicion, and fear. Eleanor's eyes met his, her expression filled with an eerie calm. "You wanted to know the truth, Father, but now that you do, can you live with it?" Father Brown felt his heart skip a beat. He had asked for the truth, but this was something he hadn't prepared for. The lies, the manipulation, the murder, none of it made sense. And now, as Eleanor's confession hung in the air, Father Brown realized that he had been searching for the wrong answers all along. "What do you want me to do with this?" he asked, his voice trembling with the weight of it all. Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't a smile of relief or repentance. It was a smile of someone who knew the game was over. "You can't undo what's been done, Father. You can't take back the past, and you can't stop what's coming." Father Brown felt a chill run down his spine as her words echoed in his ears. "You can't stop what's coming." What did she mean by that? What was coming? Before he could speak, Eleanor turned and walked towards the door, her silhouette fading into the shadows. "The secret we've been hiding, it's about to be exposed, and when it is, Father, everything will change." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Father Brown alone in the study, the weight of her confession bearing down on him. He was no closer to understanding what had really happened. The truth had just become more elusive, more dangerous than ever before. And as he stood there, staring at the closed door, one thought gnawed at his mind. What had Eleanor just unleashed? Father Brown felt his pulse quicken as the walls of the room seemed to close in on him. The mystery was deeper than he could have ever imagined. The lies, the secrets, and the betrayals, all of it was connected, but he had no idea how to untangle it. The truth was out there, but it was buried under so many layers of deception and manipulation that Father Brown wasn't sure he could ever reach it. And as the clock ticked in the background, Father Brown whispered to himself, "I know who did it, but the truth will never be told." With those words, the door to the unknown slammed shut once again, leaving Father Brown with more questions than answers. And the darkness, it seemed, was just beginning to close in. Chapter 9. The Deadly Truth. Father Brown Fears. Father Brown had seen the darkest corners of the human soul, but nothing could have prepared him for the truth that was about to be revealed. As he held the blood-stained letter in his hands, his mind screamed, "I was wrong." For the first time, Father Brown feared not for the lives of others, but for his own. The chilling truth that had been hidden from him had clawed its way to the surface, and now it threatened to engulf everything he had worked for. The letter he was holding wasn't just a message. It was a death sentence, a declaration that Father Brown had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He felt it in the very marrow of his bones, a cold, paralyzing dread that threatened to consume him. The words written on that page were not just a confession. They were a warning. For weeks, he had searched for the killer of Richard Harker, but each twist and turn of the investigation had only led to more dead ends. Every suspect he'd questioned, every lead he had followed, had pointed him back to the one conclusion he feared most, that the truth was so buried beneath layers of deceit that it might never be uncovered. But this letter, made it clear. He wasn't just chasing shadows, he was part of the darkness. Eleanor Harker's words echoed in his mind. "You've been played all along, Father. It's you who's been deceived. The real killer is standing right in front of you, and you don't even know it." The weight of her confession hit him hard. How had he been so blind? Had Eleanor really been manipulating him all along? Or had he somehow unknowingly walked into a trap, orchestrated by forces he couldn't even begin to understand? He sat down slowly in the study, the letter still clutched tightly in his hands. It felt like the walls were closing in on him, the air growing thicker with each passing second. Father Brown had been a priest for most of his life, a man of faith, of logic, and of reason. But in this moment, his faith wavered. He didn't know who to trust anymore. He was about to uncover the one thing he had feared more than anything else, the true nature of the crime that had haunted him for so long. He knew there was more to this story than Richard Harker's murder, more than the manipulation, the lies, and the cover-ups. The truth he had been seeking would not only ruin everything he had ever worked for, but it could destroy the very core of his existence. The letter, stained with Richard's blood, gave Father Brown no answers, only more questions. "The truth lies beneath the surface," the letter read, its message cryptic and chilling. "You've come too close, Father. It's time you learned the real reason Richard died." Father Brown's fingers trembled as he turned the letter over, scanning it for any hint of clarity. But all he saw was more of the same. The words weren't just ambiguous, they were taunting him. "You've been chasing shadows all along. You've been deceived, Father. Richard was just a pawn, and so are you." His mind raced. What did it all mean? Was Eleanor really involved? Had she been the mastermind? Or was she merely another victim in a far bigger game? The pieces of the puzzle had never been this complicated, this impossible to piece together. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Father Brown didn't flinch. He had expected this moment, the moment when everything would come crashing down. He had thought he would have time to prepare, time to make sense of it all, but time had run out. The door creaked open, and there stood the last person Father Brown expected to see, the constable. But this wasn't the constable Father Brown knew. This was someone entirely different. The man who had stood by Father Brown's side in countless investigations now looked at him with cold, calculating eyes. His uniform was the same, but his presence was unsettling, unnatural, like a predator circling its prey. "Father Brown," the constable said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "You've come close to the truth, but you're too late." Father Brown's heart skipped a beat. Too late? What did that mean? Was this it? Was this the moment where everything he had worked for came crashing down? Had the constable been involved in Richard's murder? Was he the one who had been pulling the strings all along? The constable stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Father Brown's. "You've uncovered a truth that you weren't meant to find, Father," he said, his voice like ice. "And now it's time to pay the price." Father Brown's breath caught in his throat as the words hit him like a punch to the gut. What was the constable saying? Had he been playing Father Brown from the beginning? Or was this just another layer of the game, another lie that had been carefully constructed to keep him in the dark? "You don't understand, do you, Father?" the constable continued. a smirk forming on his lips. You think you've been solving a murder, but what you've really been doing is digging your own grave. Father Brown stood motionless, his mind racing. What was this man trying to say? Was he the one who had been behind everything? Was he the true mastermind? But before Father Brown could react, the constable stepped closer, his hands gripping Father Brown's shoulders. The pressure was so intense that it was almost suffocating. Father Brown's breath quickened, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Father, do you really want to know the truth?" the constable whispered, his voice almost a mockery. "The truth that you've been so desperately seeking? The truth that will shatter everything you believe?" Father Brown could barely find his voice, but he managed to speak. "Tell me," he said, his voice low and desperate. "I need to know." The constable's smirk widened, and for a moment, Father Brown thought he saw something flicker in the man's eyes, a glimmer of something darker, something that made Father Brown's stomach twist. The constable leaned in closer, his breath cold against Father Brown's ear. "You've already learned too much," the constable whispered. "The truth has already claimed you, Father. And now it's time for you to join it." Father Brown's body went cold as the constable stepped back, and in that instant, the world seemed to shatter. What had just happened? What was the constable trying to tell him? Was this the end of the investigation? Was this the moment where everything fell apart? The constable turned and walked away, leaving Father Brown standing in the middle of the room, stunned and shaken to his core. His mind spun with questions, but none of them had answers. The truth, the deadly truth he had feared all along, was slipping further and further out of reach. But before Father Brown could regain his composure, the door swung open once again. Eleanor stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Her voice trembled as she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Father, you don't understand," she said. "There's still so much you don't know. The truth you're looking for, it's not what you think. It's not just about Richard, it's about everything." Father Brown's heart raced as he tried to make sense of her words. Could it be true? Could everything he had uncovered, every piece of evidence, every lead, be a lie? Was the truth he had been chasing nothing but a cruel trick? The room felt suffocating as Father Brown looked at Eleanor, his mind whirling with doubt. The truth, he thought. The deadly truth Father Brown fears. But what was the truth? Who was lying? And who could he trust? "I know who did it," Father Brown said, his voice low and filled with dread. "But the truth will never be told." And with that, the door slammed shut, leaving Father Brown alone in the dark, his soul heavy with the weight of the mystery that would never be solved. The truth, it seemed, would remain hidden forever. Chapter 10. Father Brown faces his worst nightmare. The first thing Father Brown noticed was the smell, the putrid, overwhelming stench of decay that filled the room. It was the kind of scent that clung to your nostrils and wouldn't let go, even long after you had left. It was the smell of death, and it was unmistakable. But this wasn't the aftermath of a murder. This was far worse. This was something deeper, something more disturbing than anything Father Brown had ever faced before. As he stepped into the dimly lit room, his eyes adjusted to the faint glow of the single candle flickering on the table in the center. The shadows stretched long across the walls, making everything seem distorted, unnatural. His heart raced in his chest, his instincts screaming that he was walking into something he could never walk away from. At the far end of the room, He saw her, Eleanor Harker, but she wasn't the same woman he had encountered so many times before. This time, her eyes were wide with terror, her hands trembling as she clutched a small bundle to her chest. Her face, usually composed, was twisted in a way that made Father Brown's stomach churn. "What is this, Eleanor?" Father Brown asked, his voice barely a whisper as he stepped closer. "What have you done?" Eleanor didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at him with an expression that Father Brown could only describe as pleading, desperate. It was as if she was trying to convey something, but the words wouldn't come. She glanced down at the bundle in her arms and then back at him, her eyes brimming with fear. "Father, you have to listen to me," she finally said, her voice shaky. "This is bigger than you can imagine. I didn't want to be involved in any of this, but now it's too late. You're in danger, Father. We're all in danger." Father Brown's eyes narrowed as he took a step forward. "What are you talking about, Eleanor? What danger?" She shook her head, as if trying to shake away her own terror. "The secret, the one I've been hiding, it's out, and it's going to destroy everything." Father Brown felt a cold chill run through him. The air seemed to grow heavier, thicker, as if the very room was closing in on him. The truth that Eleanor was hinting at, the one she had been so desperate to keep buried, was suddenly within reach. But he had no idea how far this truth would stretch or what it would cost him. "What secret?" Father Brown demanded, his patience thinning. "What have you been hiding, Eleanor?" She hesitated again, her eyes darting nervously to the bundle in her arms. Slowly, almost reverently, she placed it on the table before him. The bundle unraveled, revealing a small, intricately carved box. Father Brown's heart skipped a beat. He had seen boxes like this before, ones that contained not just valuables, but things that were better left untouched. Dark secrets, cursed objects. But this wasn't just any box. This one felt different. It felt alive. Father Brown reached for it cautiously, but as his fingers brushed the surface, he felt an inexplicable force hold him back. His pulse quickened, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He didn't want to touch it, and yet something deep inside him told him that this was the key to everything. "What is this?" he asked, his voice almost trembling. Eleanor's face twisted with something darker now. Regret, guilt, fear. "It's the key to everything. The key to Richard's death. The key to the lies. The key to the truth that's been hidden for years." Father Brown's mind raced. The truth that had been hidden for years. Had this box somehow been at the center of Richard Harker's death all along? Had Eleanor been part of something far more dangerous than he could have imagined? "The truth will destroy us all," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to stop digging. Father, you have to walk away before it's too late. It's too dangerous. It's cursed." Father Brown's eyes narrowed. "Cursed? Eleanor, I've seen my fair share of danger, but I can't walk away. Not now. Not when I'm so close." She shook her head, her expression pleading. "You don't understand, Father. The truth you're chasing, it's not what you think. What you uncover will tear apart everything. Everyone." Father Brown reached for the box again, but this time, as his fingers brushed its surface, a surge of power shot through him. His vision blurred, and for a split second, he felt as though the very walls of the room were closing in. He could hear whispers, voices that seemed to echo from the past, but when he tried to focus, they faded into nothing. The sensation passed as quickly as it came, but Father Brown was shaken. He pulled his hand back, his heart racing. He looked at Eleanor, who now seemed to be on the verge of collapse. "This is bigger than Richard's death," Father Brown said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions that churned within him. "You're telling me that Richard wasn't the only one affected by whatever this is, that this curse, it's been passed down through generations?" Eleanor nodded, her eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow. "Yes, the truth was buried to protect us, to protect everyone who came into contact with it. Richard dug too deep, and now you've dug too deep. There's no escaping it." Father Brown felt a chill wash over him. The idea that the death of Richard Harker, this investigation, could somehow be tied to something so ancient, so twisted, was almost too much to bear. But what else could explain the overwhelming sense of dread that had followed him since he first stepped into this house? "You've made a mistake, Father," Eleanor said quietly. "You thought you were solving a murder, but you've walked into something much darker, something that has claimed more lives than you can count. And now, it's your turn." Father Brown stepped back, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "What are you saying? What is this box?" Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "That box contains the truth, Father. But it's not the truth you want to hear. It's the truth that will destroy you. It will destroy everyone who dares to open it." Father Brown's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of her words sank in. The mystery he had been chasing had just turned into something far more sinister, far more complex than he could ever have imagined. This wasn't just about murder. This was about something far older, a curse, a secret that had been passed down through the years, carefully hidden away from the world. And now, it was threatening to consume him. Eleanor collapsed onto the chair beside the table, her body shaking, as if the weight of everything she had carried was finally too much to bear. "I didn't want this, Father. I didn't want you to get involved. But now, it's too late. It's too late for all of us." Father Brown stood frozen, his mind reeling. What was he supposed to do now? How could he stop something so much larger than himself? How could he undo the damage that had already been done? But before he could form another thought, the door to the room swung open with a loud crash. Father Brown spun around, his heart skipping a beat. Standing in the doorway was the constable, the same man who had warned him, who had played his part in the deadly game that had ensnared them all. His face was pale, his expression one of grim resignation. "Father," the constable said, his voice shaking, "you need to leave, now, before it's too late." Father Brown took a step toward him, his heart racing. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" The constable's eyes flicked to Eleanor, then back to Father Brown. "The truth? It's already been revealed. And now, there's nothing left to do but wait." Father Brown's mind raced. Wait? What did he mean, wait? Had they reached the end of the road? Was this it? Was the truth finally out? Or was it slipping further away with every passing second? The constable stepped aside, revealing the door that led deeper into the house. "It's too late, Father. You've gone too far. The truth you seek, it's not something you can live with." Father Brown's legs felt like they were made of stone, but he forced himself to move. He had come too far to stop now, but as he stepped toward the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into his own death. The truth, it seemed, was something that Father Brown would never truly understand. The mysteries that had once seemed so clear were now clouded in darkness, and the answers he sought would remain hidden forever. And as the door closed behind him, one question lingered in his mind. Was it already too late to stop the curse? And the answer, for now, was uncertain. Chapter 11. The Widow's Secret That Could Kill. The moment Father Brown walked into the room, he knew something had changed. The air felt different, heavier, like it was thick with the weight of secrets too dark to be spoken aloud. And then he saw her. Eleanor Harker, the widow who had haunted this investigation from the very start, sat at the desk with her hands folded in front of her. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes were filled with something far more dangerous. And in that moment, Father Brown realized he wasn't just investigating a murder anymore. He was about to uncover a secret so deadly it could destroy everything. "Father," Eleanor said, her voice smooth, calculated, "I was wondering when you would finally figure it out." Father Brown's heart skipped a beat. He had spent countless hours chasing the truth, following leads, deciphering lies, but nothing could have prepared him for what was coming next. "What are you talking about, Eleanor?" he asked, trying to steady his voice, though inside his mind was racing. He had thought he knew her, thought he understood her grief, but that was before he realized the truth, before he realized how deep the deception went. Eleanor's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've been waiting for you to ask the right questions, Father. I've been waiting for you to get close enough to the truth so that I could finally tell you what you've been too blind to see." Father Brown stepped closer, his senses on high alert. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He could feel it in the air, like a storm just waiting to break. "You're not just grieving your husband's death," Father Brown said, his voice quiet but firm. "You've been hiding something. What is it, Eleanor? What are you keeping from me?" Eleanor stood up from the desk, her movements slow, deliberate. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling, slightly, but there was something else behind her words. Fear, regret, or was it something darker? "I know what you've been trying to uncover, Father," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know what I've done, but you can't stop it now. It's too late. I've already made my choice, and so have you." Father Brown's chest tightened as he tried to piece together her words. "What are you talking about? What choice?" Eleanor's eyes flickered toward the window, her gaze distant, as though she was seeing something far beyond the walls of the room. "Richard's death wasn't an accident," she whispered. "It wasn't just about money or power. It was about something far more dangerous than you could ever imagine." Father Brown's pulse quickened. What was she saying? Was she confessing? Or was this just another manipulation, another game to pull him further into her web of lies? "What are you hiding, Eleanor?" he pressed, his voice sharp with urgency. "Tell me now the truth." She turned toward him, her face pale, her eyes filled with an unsettling calmness. "You're asking for the truth, Father," she said, "but you're not ready for it. No one ever is." Father Brown took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "I need to know. Now. Or I walk out that door, and you'll never see me again." For the first time, Eleanor seemed to hesitate. She took a shaky breath, as though preparing herself for something. And then, in a voice so low that Father Brown could barely hear her, she said, "The secret I've been hiding, it's a secret that could kill you." Father Brown froze, the words cutting through him like a blade. What do you mean? Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with an ancient sorrow. The truth, Father, is that Richard wasn't the only one at risk. We all were. And now you've gone too far. The secret is out, and there's no turning back. Father Brown's mind spun as he tried to make sense of what she was saying. What secret, Eleanor? What are you talking about? For the first time since he had met her, Eleanor's mask of composure slipped. She stepped toward the desk and picked up a small, weathered book that had been lying there, its pages yellowed with age. Father Brown's gaze flicked to it immediately. Something about that book felt wrong, like it contained a power that no one should ever touch. This, she said, holding it out to him. This is what Richard discovered. This is what he was going to expose. And this is why he had to die. Father Brown's heart raced as he took the book from her hands, his fingers brushing against the brittle pages. The cover was worn, the edges frayed, but there was something else. A symbol, faint but unmistakable, was etched into the cover. Father Brown had seen it before. He'd seen it in the files, in the old records he'd uncovered. A symbol of an ancient order, an organization that had been buried in the depths of history. "What is this?" Father Brown whispered, unable to tear his eyes away from the symbol. His mind was racing, trying to process the enormity of what he was holding. "It's the truth," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "It's the secret that Richard found. It's the reason he had to die. And now, it's the reason you're in danger." Father Brown looked at her, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You're telling me that this book, this thing is what caused all of this? Richard's death? The lies? Everything?" Eleanor nodded slowly, her expression one of guilt and regret. "It's not just about Richard, Father. It's about something much bigger, something that's been hidden for generations, and now you're the one who's going to have to deal with it." Father Brown's mind was racing. This wasn't just about a murder anymore. This was about something far darker, something that had been buried for centuries, an ancient secret, one that had the power to destroy everything in its path. And now, it seemed that Father Brown was the one who had unwittingly unearthed it. "You have to understand, Father," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "I didn't want this. I didn't want to be part of it. But once Richard discovered the truth, there was no stopping it. He had to be silenced. And now, so do you." Father Brown felt his blood run cold as the implications of her words sank in. "You're saying that I had no choice," Eleanor interrupted, her voice trembling with fear. "They told me it was the only way. I thought I could protect you, Father. But now, the truth is out, and there's nothing left to do but face it." Father Brown's mind was reeling. He couldn't process what he was hearing. The lies, the manipulations, the betrayals, they all seemed to blur together now. And the more he tried to make sense of it, the more he realized how little he truly understood. He looked at Eleanor, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "Tell me the truth, Eleanor," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell me everything." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, her body trembling with a mix of fear and relief. "The truth, Father, is that the people who have been controlling this entire situation, they're not human. They've been pulling the strings for centuries, manipulating everything. And now they're coming for you." Father Brown felt his stomach drop as the gravity of her words hit him. "What do you mean, not human?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Eleanor closed her eyes, her breath shaky. "They're part of something older, something that has been hidden for centuries. They're not just people, Father. They're something else. And if you don't stop them, you'll be next. The room seemed to close in around Father Brown as he processed her words. The lies, the murders, the ancient order, all of it was leading to this moment. And now he had to face the most terrifying truth of all. He wasn't just up against a murderer. He was up against something far worse. The door behind him creaked open, and Father Brown spun around, his heart racing. Standing in the doorway was the constable, his face pale, his eyes filled with dread. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Father," the constable said, his voice shaking. "It's too late to stop it now. You've uncovered the truth, and now you're part of it." Father Brown's breath caught in his throat. The truth that had haunted him for so long was now a part of him, and there was no way to escape it. "I know who did it," Father Brown said, his voice steady, but his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. "But the truth will never be told." And with that, the room went dark. The mystery, the danger, the secrets, it was all too much. And Father Brown was left standing alone, knowing that the truth would always be a step ahead, forever out of his reach. Chapter 12. Father Brown's Hidden Clue Exposed. Father Brown had seen many things in his life, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment he saw it. The hidden clue that shattered everything. The small, innocent piece of paper, folded so neatly and tucked away in the back of the drawer, was no mere piece of evidence. It was the key to a mystery so dark, so complex, that even Father Brown couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. He stood in the dimly lit room, staring at the paper in his hand, feeling the weight of it press down on him, suffocating him with its implications. It had been there all along, right in front of him, buried beneath layers of other clues, yet somehow he had missed it. The truth had been hidden, in plain sight, and now, as he unfolded it, everything he had believed about this case was about to collapse. The letter was brief, cryptic, yet its meaning was clear. It wasn't just a clue about Richard Harker's death, nor was it just another misleading piece of evidence. It was something far more personal. It was a message meant only for Father Brown. And the words written on that paper weren't just an accusation. They were a warning. "You've been following the wrong trail, Father. The truth is much darker than you realize." Father Brown's breath caught in his throat as he read those words over and over again, unable to believe them. He had been so sure, so confident, that he had pieced together the puzzle, but now, in the silence of the room, everything felt wrong. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. "What does this mean?" Father Brown muttered to himself, his mind racing. How could he have missed this? How could he have been so blind? The investigation had been months of careful deliberation, of sifting through lies, manipulation, and deceit. Yet in the end, it wasn't the truth that had eluded him. It was the lies that had been planted so carefully along the way. He glanced over his shoulder, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. This wasn't just a murder mystery anymore. This wasn't just about finding a killer. This was about something much deeper, something far more dangerous. Father Brown stepped back, the paper still gripped tightly in his hand. The walls seemed to close in on him, the darkness of the room becoming suffocating. Every step he took felt like he was walking deeper into a trap. The more he thought about it, the more everything seemed to blur together. The suspects, the lies, the endless web of deceit. All of it was leading to this moment. But what now? What was he supposed to do with this information? The door creaked open behind him, and Father Brown spun around, his heart racing. Standing in the doorway was Eleanor Harker, her face pale, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. But fear of what? Of him? Of the truth? "Father, I didn't want you to find it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't want you to know." Father Brown's hand tightened around the letter, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. "What do you mean? What is this? What's going on, Eleanor?" She took a shaky step forward, her eyes never leaving the paper in his hands. "You don't understand, Father. You've been chasing the wrong killer. You've been looking for answers in all the wrong places. But now it's too late." Father Brown's stomach twisted. Too late? What did she mean? Had she known about the clue all along? Had she been hiding it from him? His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all, but nothing added up. Eleanor had been so broken, so consumed by grief. How could she be involved in this? How could she be hiding something so crucial? "You were the last one to see Richard alive, weren't you?" Father Brown asked, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the question. Eleanor's eyes flickered with a strange, unreadable emotion. "Yes, but I didn't kill him, Father. You don't understand what happened that night. Richard's death, it wasn't just a murder. It was a sacrifice." Father Brown's heart stopped. A sacrifice? What was she talking about? Was this some kind of confession? Or was Eleanor just playing him once again, trying to twist the truth to her advantage? "A sacrifice for what?" Father Brown demanded, his patience running thin. What could Richard possibly have been involved in that would lead to this? Eleanor's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, Father Brown thought she might collapse from the weight of her own guilt. But when she spoke again, her voice was cold, distant. "It's not about Richard. It's about something much bigger, something that's been hidden for generations." Father Brown's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about Richard's death anymore. This wasn't just about uncovering the identity of the killer. This was something far older, far darker than anything he could have imagined. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes rising to meet his. "The truth, Father. It's not what you think. You've been chasing shadows, looking for answers in all the wrong places. But you've missed the most important thing. The secret, the one that Richard uncovered. It's not just about murder, Father. It's about power, control, and the people who will stop at nothing to keep it hidden." Father Brown's mind reeled. He had thought he understood the stakes, but now he was unsure. What had Richard discovered? What was Eleanor hiding? And why had she waited until now to reveal the truth? Suddenly, the room seemed to close in on him, the walls growing tighter, more suffocating. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift, to move, like they were alive. And for the first time, Father Brown felt a cold knot in his stomach. He wasn't in control anymore. The investigation had spiraled beyond his reach, and he had no idea how to pull it back. "Father, you have to stop," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "You've uncovered too much. You've seen the truth, and now there's no going back. The secret, it's exposed, and there's no telling what it will do." Father Brown stepped back, his mind in turmoil. "What secret? What are you talking about?" Eleanor's eyes were wild, her breathing shallow. "The secret of the book," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "The book Richard found. The one that tied all of this together. It's not just a book, Father. It's a key. a key to something far darker, something that could destroy everything. And now, you've seen it. You've touched it. You've uncovered it. And now, they're coming for you. Father Brown felt the room spin around him. He had thought he was getting closer to the truth, but now, everything seemed to be slipping through his fingers. The book, the clue, the secret that had been hidden for so long. And now, Eleanor was telling him that there were people who would do anything to protect it, to keep it buried forever. Father Brown's head was spinning. The words didn't make sense, but the terror in Eleanor's eyes was real. This wasn't just a game. This wasn't just a mystery. This was a battle for something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "You need to leave," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with fear. "They're coming for you, Father. And once they find you, it's over." Father Brown's mind raced as the implications of her words hit him like a wave. Who was coming for him? And why? Was Eleanor involved in this? Was she trying to protect him? Or was she just trying to cover her own tracks? The door behind him creaked open, and Father Brown spun around, his heart in his throat. Standing in the doorway was the constable, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Father, you need to listen to her," the constable said, his voice shaky. "You've uncovered something you shouldn't have. You've opened the door to something that will consume you. You need to leave, now, before it's too late." Father Brown's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Everything he had believed, everything he had uncovered, had just come crashing down. The truth he had been chasing was more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And now, there was no escaping it. The constable stepped forward, his eyes pleading. "Father, you're in danger. You need to leave this place before they find you." Father Brown stood frozen, torn between the need to uncover the truth and the growing sense of dread that was slowly overtaking him. What was he supposed to do now? What was the truth? And then, in that moment, the full weight of it all crashed down on him. He had been chasing the wrong answers, following the wrong trail. The truth had been right in front of him all along. And now, there was no going back. "I know who did it," Father Brown whispered, his voice trembling with the realization. "But the truth will never be told." And with that, the door slammed shut, leaving Father Brown alone in the darkness, with only the haunting knowledge of a secret that would never be revealed. The mystery was over, but the cost was greater than anything he had imagined. The truth would remain buried forever,